So, Dean, it's just, I suppose, getting started then. How have you been then? What have you been up to at lockdown?
I've been doing plenty of exercise, personal exercise. To be honest, I've done more in lockdown than I was previously before lockdown. I think a lot of people are the same. So I'm sort of in that routine now where if I don't do any exercise, I feel sluggish, and that's all I've been doing really. Obviously, watching plenty of old stuff footage regarding things I'm involved in with the academy and the women's, and doing lots of video stuff for that. But just trying to fill the hours in.
Yeah, good time to self-reflect though, isn't it? It's kind of been forced on us this period of time.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of people are trying to use it as a way to be productive in different ways. And I think if you can try and turn a negative into a positive, then you've got a chance to progress when you're ready to come out of it.
Yeah, I'm sure Dean Shiels, the child, if he started back his career now at this moment in time and he was playing youth football, he'd be kicking himself not getting on the pitch.
Yeah, I know. I think obviously when you're a child, it's different. You've more imagination, I think. So all you need is a ball and a wall or a few jumpers, and you can work away on your own. I think adults maybe struggle more with training on their own. But when I was a kid, I had no problems. I only needed a ball, and that was enough for me. And I think there's no excuse for kids these days to not be out with the ball in this time. So.
Yeah, so just sort of picking up on that then, on your youth career, how did it start for you? Where did you start in playing football?
Well, it was just locally. Back then, I think I started with Lisburn Youth on the under-11s, but obviously I started playing for them maybe when I was 9 or something. I think it was always 11-a-side in those days. Obviously, growing up in Upperlands, Mahara area, there wasn't a competitively strong league, and I had to go to Lisburn to try and play with the best players and against the best players. And at that time, that was a sacrifice my parents made to take me up there every Saturday morning. So that's where I started off at Lisburn Youth, and then it went from there.
So Lisburn Youth was kind of the footing for you, the foundation that you built upon then?
Yeah, I think obviously they had a tremendous record of producing players, and I think it was my dad's idea for me to go there. I'd spoken to previous people, and I think it's important to be challenged every week and to be playing in the best league, and that certainly was definitely the best league at that time.
Yeah, what league was that? Was it the Mid-Ulster League?
It was the Lisburn and District. I don't know the exact name of it, but at that time you had Dungoyne, St Andrews and Lisburn Youth. Hillsborough Boys were all strong clubs, so Lurgan Town. There was players that travelled from all over the country to play in that league. So as I said, in the Darien District had a summer league. So that side of the country they had all their good players were playing in the summer, and I actually played in that league too when the Lisburn League was over. So, but at that time, all the best players played in the Lisburn District.
Right, and your participation in the Darien District League, what age did that happen at? Was it sort of early on or later on?
It was more like under 12s, 13s, I think. I played for Newton Youth, so it didn't overlap with the Lisburn League. So it was more midweek games at night. So no, I thoroughly enjoyed that too. Great times playing for both those teams growing up.
And would you say that kind of that extra contact time with playing in the summer league, was it of benefit to you, do you think, developing as you went forward?
I think so. I think obviously the Lisburn and District League, however many games it was, there was quite a big break there when the season ended. So it was perfect for a young player at that time was itching to get playing games, and it was always great playing in the summer. I found at Lisburn you turned up and there was always morning kickoff, maybe 9 a.m. sometimes kickoff, but with Newton it was always summer evening, decent weather, decent pitches, and it was quite refreshing actually.
It makes a difference, isn't it, when the weather's good and you're playing a bit of football?
Yeah.
You mentioned your dad earlier on there in terms of the influence he had. Can you just sort of expand on that a little bit? Because we know who your dad is. It was Kenny Shiels, the international women's manager at the moment. So what kind of influence did he have early on in your playing career?
Well, I think he had the main influence. Obviously, I always had talent to sort of play the game, but I think that talent needed defined and sort of worked on, and he instilled in me a mentality of training at a very young age, whether it be before school, after school, raining, snowing. We were out training one-on-one regularly, probably nearly every day, I would say. And that sort of instilled resilience in me to practice at that age when you needed it.
Yeah.
And I was playing with players that weren't getting that. Obviously, their parents maybe weren't as motivated as him or didn't know the game as well as him. So I was very fortunate that I had someone pushing me and had the ability to know what I needed to work on. And I think I was very fortunate at that stage to have someone like that to be able to do that.
Just for the coaches amongst us, what kind of stuff were you doing in a 1v1? Was it pass and receiving exercises? Was he putting you into situations that made you think and make decisions?
Yeah, I think initially it was all technical, work on touch. We had a wall at the back of the house, keeping it up with the wall, working on touches. Then we'd go to the pitches and it would be shooting drills, finishing drills. Again, there'd be a lot of work a lot of running as well. Fitness stuff, short, sharp stuff. But mainly everything with the ball, working on left foot, working on my weak foot as much as I could. So basically getting as many touches with the ball as possible.
And that's key, isn't it? At a very young age, you talked about the Derry City experience where you got extra contact time, and you talked about obviously with your dad and the extra contact time you had there. So it's kind of building that footing for you to be able to go on then and play probably at a higher level because you've had that additional contact time as a youngster.
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously I've not stopped playing that long, but I think regarding the opportunities now for children, there's a lot more. Boys clubs back then would have maybe trained once a week. So if you weren't doing extra on your own, you were standing still and you weren't progressing. So I was fortunate enough to have that direct contact, one-on-one training constantly. I think I benefited from that. As I said, back then I didn't train with Lisburn because I lived so far away. They trained once a week, and it was more I trained locally with my dad. Basically, that was my training for the week. And then if he was manager of certain teams at certain times, I joined in with them as I got a bit older.
And just off the back of that, Phil Melville, if I can just bring you in, you've got a question just to ask Dean in and around awareness and decision making, which might tie in quite well with the theme of the last two answers.
Yeah, Dean, obviously you spoke there about your dad, and we're talking about Dean Shiels, the player. Even at that young age, and I've spoken to your dad and I've known him for 20 years, it wasn't just you and the ball and you and the wall and you and him. Was he at a young age asking you to do things which were in the game, like swivel head and pass it off the wall and check your shoulders and scan and see what's going on? Was that embedded in you at a young age, 7, 8, 9, 10?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. Then it becomes natural. I find now from coaching kids or whatever, the kids that are 7, 8, 9, 10, the habits have to be instilled as early as possible. And he was working on those things with me. Back then, we used to call it have a picture. Now it's scanning, but it was always have a picture, know what's around you. And I think we would put in things like that, reactional stuff that's still happening now, whereas you'd fire a ball in, you would go to a certain corner, you would have to react off. So if you didn't scan or if you didn't have a picture, when the ball's coming towards you, then you didn't know, you took your touch and it's too late. But no, those habits were installed very early, and as I said, the benefits from them stuck with you throughout your career.
Yeah, and Dean, maybe one last thing, because, and I think your story is probably the most remarkable story in the last 30 years. You're not 6'2". You weren't blessed with pace. It was that game awareness and that understanding, decision making that I think, as well as your touching things, is that you think which helped you make it. If you look at the modern football, what they're looking at now, Dean Shiels has none of those characteristics: the pace, the 6'2", the strength,
No, I think when you're talking about strength, you are what you are, you know. So I grew up. When I went to Arsenal, as I got my body got bigger and I was growing. Obviously, I worked hard in the gym, but every time I went out on a Saturday, my opponent was stronger than me every time. So how do I adjust to that? The adjustment I made was when I played striker, centre forward, I was getting the ball and I was just getting pushed off the ball. So I had to find a way to deal with pressure, and that would obviously, I worked it out that I can't go up against these players. I can't go shoulder to shoulder with these players or be so tight. So I had to use movement, awareness, and space was the biggest thing I had to use. I had to drop into the space where the defenders wouldn't come towards me or the centre midfielders wouldn't come towards me. Whereas if I got too close to him, I lost the ball. So another instance for that would be as the ball's coming to me, your receiving skills had to come into play there, which is something I worked on. So my first touch had to be away from the opponent every time, because if the opponent's coming from my right-hand side and I'm taking my touch in towards the opponent, he's going to come and out-strength me and take it off me. So I had to use the abilities that I had with receiving skills, awareness, where to take my touch. I think was one of the most important things I learned growing up, because if you take your touch towards a stronger player, you're going to lose the ball the majority of the time. So like the biggest one on that was I didn't have much pace, as you said. I was skinny. I wasn't that explosive. I was quite quick over 1 or 2 or 3 yards, but I wasn't explosive as the modern day is. But the big emphasis for me was, you're playing against someone stronger than you. How do you react to that? And that's what I had to do. I had to adjust.
And I think that you make a vital point there as well. And you were talking about the fact that maybe you weren't 6'2", you didn't have the explosive pace, but instead of you focusing purely on those negatives and trying to make those weaknesses better, you focused on the strengths. You know, you made your strengths better so that you could focus in the game scenario, as you said, to be able to move the ball, manipulate the ball in different directions to get away from the defender. So rather than having a pure focus on developing your weaknesses, you maybe just focus a little bit more on your strengths. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think ball manipulation is key, as you said there, in those tight areas and receiving the ball away from the opponent. Again, I think you can always work on your weaknesses regarding strength, upper body strength. At that time, football training wasn't too much on strength with the legs, squatting. Now footballers are doing lots of squatting, lots of lunges and explosive pushing off, box jumps, etc. There was none of that when I was growing up, really. Mm-hmm. So the strength of my legs came from the hard training and the runs and the short, sharp work. So that I was never going to get as strong. There was a limit to my strength I was always going to be. So I had to use my technical skills to try and make it as a footballer. Basically, that was the only way I was going to make it.
So you found yourself, at the early years, participating in the Dairy League, like you said, out with your dad, doing extra training, doing some training with his teams that he was managing at the time as well for extra contact. And we just briefly spoke there about, you developing those strengths. So if it brings us on to Arsenal then, how did that come across, and what experience did you find over there that helped you develop those strengths?
Well, I like any club, when you go there as a YTS at that time, it was called, I signed a 1-year apprenticeship and a 3-year professional contract. So I signed a 4-year deal, and it was the best time. It was the best education that you could get. There was world-class players in every quarter. It was just being around those types of players, seeing how they eat, how they train. After I finished training with the youth team, we'd sprint right over and try and get to watch the last part of the first team session. And you were just in the best place possible at that time. At that time, Arsenal were the best team in the world. Although they didn't win the European Cup, the Invincibles, I was there when they had the Invincibles. So they, you couldn't help but learn it. I always said that was the best education you could get, is being in that environment. And I was fortunate to be there at that time.
Did you ever get a chance to interact with any of those guys, the first teamers? Did they come down?
Yeah, I did. The English lads were brilliant. At that time, you had Tony Adams, Seaman, Dixon. Ray Parlour was very good with me. and Martin Keown. I remember being injured beside. When you had injuries, you were lucky enough to be beside some of the first team players, and I spent a lot of time with Ray Parlour and Martin Keown. Mm-hmm. And Keown used to always tell me, anything your coach tells you, go home and write it down. At that time, I was thinking, what's he talking about? But now, the more I grew out throughout my career, it related that was actually an excellent piece of advice by an ex-pro that had been there and done it, you know.
Yeah.
But no, it was perfect. Obviously, as I got older, I started to play pre-season friendlies with the first team. I trained with them for pre-season for 2 weeks. So, no, there was great learning capacities there for me.
And in respect to that move across the water to Arsenal, I'm sure it can be quite daunting from a player coming from a small little area in Northern Ireland to head over to a big city. What did you find that you had to adapt the most? Not just about your playing style, but about the way you lived or the way you held yourself?
It was difficult, I'll be honest. At the start, the first year was hard. Obviously, I live in a small village over here, so going to London, the big lights, was just a dramatic change. I just finished fifth year. I was 16, and it was hard. I was put in digs, and initially I was meant to be in digs with another player, but the player didn't come for a few months later. So I was on my own with a family, and it was very, very difficult to settle. You missed home, you missed your friends, but that was a sacrifice. Looking back in the long run, I think it really toughened me up mentally to go through that process of having to be strong mentally to survive and not give up that.
Yeah, and obviously you mentioned there you went across to England and Arsenal when you were 16. You have represented Northern Ireland from under 16 all the way through to senior level. So in that respect, how did you find juggling international representation as well as coach? As well as club football?
It was always just. So a lot of the time you'd be counting the days to the international meet up. One, you would get to see all your friends who you'd played with, people from back home. If you had a home game in Northern Ireland, it was a chance to see your family and friends. So it was always an honour to be selected. And then the benefits of that were seeing your friends and family if you had a game in Northern Ireland, or spending time with people of the same personalities and friends you'd grown up with. So no, it was a great break from club football. If I'm being honest, it was very good to get away and sort of represent your country in that way. But regarding, especially when you're homesick at those early ages, it was great to get a break from that.
And in terms of sorry, off you go, Phil. Yep.
Dean, obviously in those days, there was no mobile phones. It was the big red box, and you probably had to walk half a mile to find one to phone home.
Yeah. No, it was difficult communicating. There was no real, as you say, texts or emails or FaceTime. And back then, it was maybe a call every couple of days to check in. There wasn't a good communication line with your family, and I think my mum and dad obviously had a house phone at the time, so. You used to ring the house phone when you were trying to ring home, and it wasn't as easy to adjust with. Nowadays you can do things to see how people are getting on, but back then, it was walk down the street, put a pound in, and ring the house phone.
Yeah, brilliant.
Not that old though, Phil. I'm not that old. Yeah,
Gary. Maybe at this stage, Dean, and it's really what you're comfortable talking about. I think probably most of the coaches on are aware of the publicity there's been in the press concerning your accident, some players. But maybe you want to talk about that. What age or when did it happen, or how it happened, or whatever you're comfortable speaking about. If you maybe want to share, because there's probably a lot of findings in that coaches, when you take into consideration you weren't 6'2", you didn't have pace, and the accident, how you ever got to play professional football is actually unbelievable.
Obviously I had two adjustments with the eye problem. Growing up, I had the adjustment. It happened when I was like 10. So the adjustment from, at that time, the incident happened, and I had 5 operations to try and salvage sight in the eye, and it wasn't working. And at that time, I could see shadows out of the corner of the eye. The eyesight was I had maybe 5% of sight in the eye, so I could see like maybe big black shadows coming, but it was very, very difficult to see without using the other eye. And then I played my whole youth career with under those conditions. I signed for Arsenal with that. I went to Hibs next with that, and then as I think it was my second season at Hibs, my bad eye began to fill up with pressure, blood. Sunlight was just an absolute killer for me. It was just complete. It was just a write-off by that time, my eye. So I had a meeting with the specialists when I was playing at Hibs, and they said, look, it has to come out. So then I went from the adjustment of having 0 sight there when I was maybe 19, 20 to having maybe 5%, which is a big difference. 0 to 5% is a big difference. So I had to adapt again regarding moving my head when I played. And while I was going through the operation, it's probably well documented, I actually played a game without any implant in there at all. For Hibs reserves, as I was coming back, I was just running about with it open, and because I'd missed football for so long because of it, I didn't want to miss any more. And I was while they were making the implant, I was still playing for the reserve team.
Yeah, but Dean, and maybe then obviously 10 years of age, 11 years of age, psychologically, how did it impact on you at that young age? And can you remember the support network you had of your family was obviously massive, but you know, we've already spoke that your strength was your vision, your awareness, your scanning. You know, trying to comprehend how you developed that as a young boy at that young age. How did you do it? How did you cope mentally and physically? Was that your football dream over, or did it just make you more determined?
I think mentally at that time, when you're 10 and 11, it's not. I had a mentality where I always sort of had a positive outlook, and it wasn't going to hold me back at all. I think looking back at it now as an adult, I would have more questionable. I would be questioning myself even more, thinking, how am I going to play with this? But I think there was a fearless factor there, that I was just playing football. I was at that age, 10, 11, 12, all you want to do is enjoy the game. I was loving playing football. So I was like, right, you're at your 5 operations. Oh, this one didn't work. Right, well, if I got a game on Saturday? My whole focus was on football. So it wasn't I wasn't worrying about the end game, rather than I was more short-term focused on, who do we play this week? Right, that's great. Get on with it. You need an operation. Oh no, well, so how long am I going to be out for? Will I not be able to play for Lisburn this weekend, or sort of thing? That was my whole mentality. I wasn't thinking of the long-term effect it would have on my life. I was more thinking, I was 11 years old. I was thinking, right, I just want to play football, you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Thank you.
And as just to pick up on that point, what Phil was asking there in terms of the adaptation that you made when you were at Arsenal, and then obviously we talked about how you came back home with the Northern Ireland squad and the idea of getting to see the family and the friends. But in terms of the actual footballing, I suppose the footballing standards that you had at Arsenal in comparison to Northern Ireland, did you have to adapt your game in any kind of way to play international football?
Well, international football is different. It is very much different to club football, and it's more of you turn up, you've got like 5 days preparation for a game, and it's all microwaved. So regarding it's all done fast. There's lots of double sessions. There's lots of preparation, planning to win a game on a Saturday. Whereas when you're with Arsenal, at that time it was more development, and winning wasn't everything. But when you turn up with your national, you're in qualifiers, and you're flying all over Europe to do qualifications, and the type of football was different regarding the pace of the game. It was more slower in the first 2/3, and then when you get into the final third, it's got quickened up. But again, making the adjustment from club football to to international football. I think it suited me a little bit more because the pace was slower at times, and it was more thoughtful. Regarding club football, it's just crash bang wall up, score every time you get the ball. But no, there is a slight adjustment, but I think most players can adjust to it not too bad.
That was actually my next point. You've led me on quite well to that. Is that if you had to think back in terms of the international games you played and the club football you played, was there a preferred style that you like to play in?
Yeah, I like to play a game where if you're receiving the ball to feet, obviously with my characteristics, what we spoke about, not being strong or physical, I always played my best football when I was playing in a team that passed the ball on the floor and I was receiving the ball to feet. Throughout my career, I had managers trying to get me running on after flick-ons off a big centre forward, which I felt was just a waste of time. I always felt that you're better playing someone with different characteristics than myself if you're playing that type of football. But I think because of I was quite whatever qualities I brought to the table, they still wanted me in the team, but they weren't getting the best out of me because they'd launch it to a striker, he nailed it down, and I was fighting in a physical battle with a centre half or a midfielder for the second balls, and it just didn't suit me.
But I suppose ultimately there's learning lessons in both respects. As you know, go back to the conversation you had at the very start in terms of you finding it very physical and having to adapt your playing style. You were able to do that later on in your career as well, as you said, when you went to international football.
Yes. Obviously, when you're international football, regarding even club football as well, regarding who the manager is, you have to adapt your game to what he wants. Mm-hmm. So whether it was Lawrie Sanchez, who came in with Wimbledon type game, who gave me my debut, and I actually loved playing for Lawrie. He gave me my debut, and obviously the ball was going to go long, but I was trying to drop into pockets and where it might drop. It was more guesswork, but I still enjoyed that type of, and still enjoyed getting on the ball wherever I could. Again, Nigel Worthington come in, it was basic robotic 4-4-2, don't go out of your shape at all. So I was a player who liked freedom. I played number 10 a bit, or if I played wide, it was always coming off the left. They received the ball in the half-turn pockets. Mm-hmm. So when Nigel came in, I had to adjust my game to a robotic 4-4-2 style of don't lose your shape, run in straight lines. So you have to adapt. If you don't adapt to the way the manager wants, you're not going to play, or you're not going to be in the squad. So whether that be club football or international football, a club is different. You can maybe change clubs. This style doesn't suit me. I'll try and find a club that's just me. But international wise, that's your country. You do anything to play for your country. So you have to try and make adjustments that suits the manager's style of play.
And just sort of staying on that international theme, if you could think back in terms of all the representation from 16 to senior international, if you could pick out one of the most fondest memories that you have. Now, you mentioned obviously playing with Lawrie Sanchez and him giving you the debut. Maybe you've already answered that question. But what would be the fondest memory you have from international football?
I think it would be my goal. I scored against Luxembourg. It was a great team move. I played 2-1-2s with Johnny Evans. Johnny stepped in. It was just a class act. And I got in the half-turn in the hole and behind their midfield. And Johnny threaded it through to me. Then he stepped in again, and I bunched it back to him. As I laid it, I've made a run in behind the defence, and Johnny just stuck it into my path, and I've thanked the keeper, and that was a big moment for me. I think your first moment of getting on the pitch was against Ronaldo, was playing for Portugal, so that was a big moment. I think your first cap is always one you'll remember, but I think getting my goal in one of the qualifiers was good as well. And
as you mentioned there about the way you were able to combine with Evans, and you were able to describe that quite vividly, and that memory is obviously sticking out in the fore of your mind. But would there be...
I've watched that a million times,
reliving it every day. But in terms of actually being in that moment, and we talked about earlier on about the scanning and awareness, did you have a picture in your head as to how you wanted that moment to plan out, or was that just playing and feeling for what happened at that time?
No, I think that goal initially comes from playing with good players, and Johnny's hit of class. and you can make angles in the pockets or in behind the midfield, and you won't get the ball, or you'll get it at the wrong side, or playing with good players. It wasn't anything that was pre-planned. It was initial. It was a move I made my whole career. I tried to get in the pocket in front of the right back, between the right back and the centre back, and I tried to get in that space, and always tried to get on the half turn in that area. So Johnny was just a good enough player to find me, and then I gave him it back, and his weight of pass and comes from playing with good players when it clicks like that.
Yeah, and on that point, in terms of playing with the good players, you've obviously had a time at Rangers, and a relatively successful time, I suppose, at Rangers, because you won a few things there. If you just sort of take us back to that time, what were your feelings at the time you signed for Rangers? What was the feeling inside you at that moment?
Well, I just came off probably one of the best seasons in my career at Scotland. I played for my dad at Kilmarnock. I scored 15 goals from midfield, and I was playing the best football in my career at the time. And luckily,
Dean, can I maybe ask you, was that because of your dad? He had moved up and he was doing really well at Kilmarnock. At that stage, did he have a big influence in that one season before you went?
Massive. It was massive because I had freedom to play. He knew how to get the best out of me, and I had freedom to go and express myself and play in a style of football that suited me, and he knew how to get the best out of me. We played football to feet. It was just, we had that type of, we beat Celtic. We won the cup that year, and we had an attitude where if you score 3, we'll score 4. We were involved in high scoring games all the time. I think that style of football just suited me, and it got the best out of me. And my contract was up, and obviously my dad was still manager of Kilmarnock, so I had to give him the elbow.
How did that go down?
I know. I was obviously I was voted for the best player in the league that year. I feel as if I probably should have won it. They gave it to Charlie McGrew, who Celtic defender, great player. I was in a strong position. I was out of contract. I always wanted to play abroad. You're playing against the same players every year, so I was keen to try and go abroad. I spoke to teams in Denmark. I spoke to Norwegian, Scandinavian teams. I went to Germany. I was in Germany at the time when Rangers offered me the contract. So I knew of their interest, but it was a difficult time for me because I was arriving in I was going to be at a club in Germany, and I arrived in the departures lounge. I was waiting on my bag, and there was this big German guy standing outside with a big sign saying Dean Shiels. So I thought, there's the guy who's picking me up. So I was waiting on my bag. My agent rang me as I was waiting on the bag, and he said, look, Rangers have come in with a 4-year offer. I think you should take it. So I was like, well, you set up this move to Germany, and the guy's waiting on me outside. So I already had agreed it, but I was in Germany, and this guy drove me an hour. He couldn't speak English. I went and met the chairman and the manager of the club, and I said, look, I really have to apologise because a team from Scotland just came in with an offer, and I think I'm going to accept that. So I actually agreed the deal as I was in Germany at the time. So it was a great opportunity. A club the size of that, I know that they had been relegated down the leagues, but it was still Rangers, and it was an opportunity I couldn't turn down.
And just off the back of that, then, the stature of the club and the history that comes with the club, did you feel any weight of pressure at all?
Not really. I was always quite a private person, and when I played, I wasn't too much into the rah-rah of being on social media or being... when I played the game, I wanted to be private. So I protected myself at all times. That's throughout my club. I think at Hibs, anyone who's been at the clubs, Hibs or Hearts, is quite an intense place to play, to be honest. So I was instilled in that environment and that pressure from playing there. There's high intensity. All that matters in that city is Hibs and Hearts, and that sort of stand me in good stead from moving to Rangers. So there's pressure. I think the more pressure comes from within, wanting to do well for yourself rather than there's an enormous fan base there that's putting pressure on you. But it was more of pressure from within that drove me on, sort of.
I think that's a key theme throughout so far, has been that self-motivation you've had, that drive inside to really challenge yourself and push yourself. Would you say that had been consistent throughout your career, and that was something that helped sort of get you to the level you eventually did play at?
I think so. I think mentality for any footballer is massive, because it's you're in the industry of, you play well, you score, you get man of the match, and you go home and you're feeling so good about yourself, and you train hard next week, you go out the next week, you don't play well, you give away a goal, you miss a chance, something happens, and such a journey of being a football player with the pressure, like you say, because you're in the spotlight of everyone knows what you're doing for a living and everyone's judging your performance. So one week you're great, next week you're poor. So it's dealing with that high, not getting too high and thinking you're great because you've played well, and then when you've played poorly, not beating yourself up about it too much, where your confidence goes, it affects your game the next week. And being a professional footballer in the bigger clubs is very difficult, dealing with consistency and the highs and lows of playing well and playing poorly. Mentality becomes key to protect yourself from not getting too carried away.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier on in that answer about trying to get outside of your comfort zone and maybe looking at elsewhere to try and challenge yourself in terms of other leagues, other teams you could potentially play for. When your time at Rangers came to an end, you came back to Dundalk, was it? For a short while. But after that, you headed off to Canada. So how did that come about?
Well, I was trying to get. I was keen to play abroad in some capacity. It was close to happening a couple of times, but obviously I was coming to the end of my career, and I thought it would be a good experience. It was a fantastic experience. Colin Miller was the coach. He's a Scottish guy, so there was a link there from Scotland. He had known about me, and it was a Canadian team I played for, Edmonton, that was in the American NASL, which was an American league. And we had Miami, we had San Francisco, we had New York, we had Puerto Rico, believe it or not. The team in the Caribbean were in the league. So the away experiences were phenomenal from a lifestyle point of view. We would play the games on a Saturday evening. We'd arrive maybe on the Tuesday. You would spend 5 days in New York or Puerto Rico, Miami, and the experience was phenomenal. The football wasn't great, I'll be honest. Physically, again, the Americans were mountains. Tactically, they were way behind the British players, but from a lifestyle point of view, it was a great experience.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of just sort of mentioned it there in terms of the playing style not being just as great. Just for those who aren't aware of the league, can you just give us a brief overview of what that playing style actually was?
Again, as you can imagine, the high emphasis was on strength, fitness. They were very they loved the gym. The gym was everything to them, whereas I was more of when's the ball's coming out, running. Again, Colin Miller was a very defensive coach. It was 4-5-1 and hit the striker. I think we went 7 games without scoring a goal. So it was the playing style that my team had wasn't great. There was a team in the league, Miami at that time, were managed by Alessandro Nesta, the ex-AC Milan in Italy player. They had a fantastic style of play where they had a lot of money and they brought in Brazilian players, and there was a couple of teams in the league that were technically tried to. The New York Cosmos, again, they had financial support, so they had good players. But
yeah, but by the time you got to Canada, you'd played somewhere in the region of over 300 senior games. So as a player, you're the kind of player, like you said, like to drop in the 10 rule, get on the ball and make things happen. If that's not happening in that team, do you have the confidence to go to the manager and ask him to adapt the playing style, or is it something you just deal with?
I think you can gauge the relationship you have with the manager. Colin was quite an approachable guy, but again, from being in Scotland, I'd experienced that type of manager. There's 90% of managers in Scotland are like that. It's low risk play, put the ball in the channel, get up, try and get a throw in high up, and then play for seconds percentages. So I had experienced that before. So he was approachable. You could speak to him about it. Again, I don't think he had the players. We had good players. We had talented players that could play football, but I think he wanted a style of football that suited his management style. And I think you've got to be careful with the line. You can't tell a manager how to play his team. I think you've got to be careful with that one.
And then that just kind of eases us nicely into your current sort of career, I suppose, in coaching. Was it a transition that you've always planned to make, or was it something that came about, obviously, because of the history that your dad has?
No, I've been initially. I always had it in my mind. I'd like to become a coach or a manager, and it's something that's just naturally fell into place. I wasn't one of those that wanted to do it as early as possible. While I was still playing, I wanted to wait for the process where I finished playing. I could put all my sort of energy into learning and educating myself as much as I can, and going through the process of getting my badges and learning as much as I can. Obviously, I think from being in the situation, we haven't spoke about at Doncaster. I was part of a fantastic team that played in the championship. We were a smaller club, but we played under a manager called Sean O'Driscoll, who was one of the best coaches I ever had. He was all about learning the game, educating the players, challenging the players on a daily basis, and certain things like that I've kept with me regarding now I want to be a coach and a manager, and those things that I've learned from managers, I want to try and bring out in my own style,
I don't know if you've seen my, sorry Phil, I don't know if you've seen my questions beforehand, but that was exactly the next question I was going to ask. Was in terms no, but it was good because I want to just pick it apart a little bit, because obviously you kind of straddle both ends in terms of the youth and the senior, because of obviously the work you're doing in your academy, but also the work that you do at the senior women's international setup. If you kind of had to divide those experiences you've had in the past and the learnings that you've taken from the managers, what would you say is more applicable to the youth game, and what would you say is more applicable to the senior game that you're currently in?
Oh, I think you have to adapt your coaching. If you're coaching adults or kids, I think when you're coaching kids at an academy, you're a development coach, really. You're developing players, you're developing technique, skills, and it's more educational and learning. But when you're coaching adults, it's you're a performance coach. Basically, you're trying to get a result at the end of the week, albeit a qualifier but regarding the women's game is developing so fast, there is similar things that you can do with kids than with women, because so in a way I'm still developing the adults as well, to form habits that they should have been doing as a kid. But as I said, I'm enjoying both of them, and it's helping me as a coach develop and learn both sides of the game.
Yeah, sorry Phil, I cut you off there. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, Dean, you spoke about Sean O'Driscoll, who I've actually seen working as well. You said he challenged you. That in coaching, was he more asking questions of players in sessions? Yeah. What do you think? Why, rather than being a more directive coach?
Massive. He was massive on why. I mean, to the point where we would do a 4-minute possession drill. He would call everyone in and say, "What did you think of that?" So he would put the emphasis on the players, and he would say, "What worked in that? What didn't work in that? What can we do better in that?" And then we'd go back in, we'd do another 4 minutes, and he would call us in again. And it would be complete, and he would be putting the ownership onto the players, and it would be the players solving solutions themselves and working out problems. And there would always be, from the moment you arrived there would always be an emphasis on a lot of clubs you could get away with turning up and being passive and going through sessions without being challenged and getting away with it and getting a share and going home. With him, there was always, from the warm-up, you had to be switched on your toes. Simple thing, I'll tell you. So in the warm-up, he would set down 5 different colours of cones in a line, and I'm talking maybe 50-metre line. So you've got a green cone, a white cone, a yellow cone, a blue cone, and a red cone. And every red cone, you had to put your knees up. Every blue cone, you had to go backwards. Every green cone, you had to go side to side. So, and instantly in the warm-up, you're being challenged to think straight away. So if you're not thinking, what's the green cone, red cone, it's just a small example of making the players think and switching them on for the game. There would be more stuff like we would play small-sided games. He would halfway line the pitch. He would call one player from each team over. He would say, your rules for your team are 2 touch during half, all in the final third. Your rules for your team are 1 touch. Now, if one of the players, and then he would send that player back to his teams, and if one of the players made a mistake, took too many touches in the wrong area, or he would blame the player who relayed the message. He would, from not explaining it well enough, it would always be the player who he called to explain the rules to's fault. Just small details like that, which made you think. There would be different coloured footballs, yellow ball, white ball. You would have to do certain things with a yellow ball during a game. But if you had a white ball, you would have to do, you would be all in. If you got a yellow ball, you'd only like 2 touches. And if you took all in when you had the wrong ball, things that made you think about the game in a completely different way.
Brilliant. Love it.
Fantastic.
Gary,
yes.
Over to you. Maybe
Thanks.
Time to maybe move on to some questions.
Yes, that's exactly where we're at with the main structure of the interview done. And Dean, thank you for being so open and honest. I think anyone who's listened, that really has taken a great insight to that. So we appreciate that.